So you want to buy a Sony LED TV. Well, I have some info for you. Will it be the X90J, the X95J, or neither? Let's talk it out. The Sony X90J and X95J are two TVs you may be looking to buy, but have very little understanding of the differences. So I'm going to go over the X90J, the X95J, their physical differences, and then show the direct comparison with these two TVs with content and some tests before making recommendations. Because if you're planning on buying one of these TVs, you should know what you're gaining or losing. So if that's something that's helpful to you, please make sure to smash the like button at any point of the video or just do it now. And if you foresee needing TV or home theater buying advice in the future, you should subscribe to the channel and set the notification bell to all so you're reminded when I upload a new video. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, so follow me there for information and questions between videos, as well as my new streaming channel, Pass the Remote, where I host live discussions about TVs with Stop the FOMO and many guests. All of that is in the description. With that out of the way, I want to get right into some physical differences on these two TVs. First, the X90J has feet that just pop right into the bottom of the TV with little fanfare or confusion. This height allows for a soundbar underneath, but there isn't a lower profile look like some of the recent high-end TVs. The X95J feet aren't a whole lot more complicated, but you need a screwdriver and have to find screws out of the bag to secure the feet to the back of the TV. There are two different heights on the X95J, so you can get that low profile or raised up look depending on your needs. The body of the two TVs are also different. The X90J is pretty light, which is nice to get it up on the table by myself, but it does have a cheaper build quality. On the other hand, the X95J is pretty heavy and the edges have a thicker square look, and it's a bit creaky when picking it up. Both of these TVs have speakers on the side to help direct sound out of the audience, but the X90J has downward firing woofers while the X95J are still on the back. Neither TV sounds exceptional, but the audio on both is serviceable if you can't afford a soundbar after the TV purchase. Most Sony TVs in 2021 have two HDMI 2.1 ports, so you can game at 4K at 120 frames per second. In addition, both of these TVs have the next-gen ATSC 3.0 tuner, so as more markets come online, you'll be able to get high-quality channels. The most noticeable external difference is how each of the TVs handles reflection. Right off the bat, I try and get a good look at these screens to see how well it will handle ambient light, and I can see the X95J is much better at reducing glare from the windows and door with the screen off. The X90J isn't terrible, and if you don't have a lot of windows, it may not be something that is concerning. But with the TVs turned on, you can see that bright ambient light is cut down much better on the X95J below. This is something that I tend to get a lot of comments on, so I'd be interested in knowing if you can see a big difference here, or maybe you can just control the ambient light in your room. Let me know in the comments. Since the TVs are on, we can start to talk about the differences in the picture quality, and I'll show you a couple tests before rendering some buying advice. First, just a reminder for anyone who's new to 2021 TVs from Sony, the X90J and the X95J both have the XR processor, which not only looks amazing when upscaling, but also is able to push extra brightness to highlights and focus on objects as a human would. I've already noticed a big difference in detail and small highlights on the Sony OLEDs this year, and these LED TVs are pretty bright and vibrant as well. Both TVs have the newer Google TV home screen, where the layout is a bit more organized than previous versions of Android OS. The home screen is divided into different areas relevant to your preferences and Google account, so there's always something to watch. And when you buy one of these TVs, you get some free movies from the BRAVIA Core app that can stream content at up to 80 megabytes per second. It looks pretty good, and Sony seems to be working out some of the BRAVIA Core bugs, because now I can fast forward and see where I'm at in the movie. But if you're a film buff like myself, then you probably already have access to most of these movies on other platforms like HBO Max and Netflix. So I backed out of the Apple TV to get to the screensaver, because many times when I have two TVs at home, I'll pop these on and look at scenes that I've seen on nearly every TV in the house. I know what they look like on the best OLEDs and LCD TVs, and these two Sonys look pretty good. This was in custom HDR mode, and it started off with me wondering if the X95J was too bright or just right. The X90J has better contrast ratio, but the X95J on the bottom retains all of the detail that I see on the X90J, but is definitely brighter. One concern I have with LCD TVs is whether or not I could recommend them for nighttime viewing. First, the X90J and the X95J are LCD-based TVs, and neither has perfect contrast or perfectly uniform black levels. However, the uniformity on a near black screen was slightly better on the X90J. I only noticed this when the screen was going to black from a bright scene, and was only for a split second. In your typical dark scene, both TVs looked fine, and it was really hard to say that one was dramatically different from the other. Secondly, neither of these TVs has a tremendous amount of dimming zones. The X90J on top has only 32 dimming zones on the 65-inch TV. The X95J on the bottom has 60 zones. So when testing them, it can be a bit disappointing to see the little white box lighting up a good amount of the screen as you move around. But really, that's just a test, and realistically, you need to figure out what you'll be watching in your home and your conditions to determine if this will be an issue. For both TVs, I'll say that while there is some blooming in widescreen movies or with subtitles, it doesn't seem to be as noticeable as other TVs that are even more expensive. And when watching TV in full screen, it's basically a moot point, because I didn't notice either having blooming issues with cable, sports, or movies. With regard to your typical screen uniformity or dirty screen effect, I did notice that the X90J is a bit dirtier than the X95J below. The X95J had a slight bit of vignetting around the corners, but the X90J on top had that same vignetting and actually had some blotchiness around the screen. So while Sony TVs are fairly clean, the X90J is a bit disappointing above. And when getting back to actual content that you'll watch, I wanted to offer some sports and movies so you have ammo when I make recommendations, because the X95J does have a significant brightness advantage. Now the X90J, again, is very solid and I would have little to complain about, but the X95J is definitely brighter and quite impressive. And adding that brightness to the better anti-reflective coating of the X95J, and you have a clear winner in a bright room. I'm not sure we can assign an exact dollar amount to the brightness because it's not really an easy thing to do, but let's go over some of the important information and see if we can get a TV for you. When you consider either of these TVs, you have a few factors to think about. The first considerations are typically size and price, and those are just numbers, so hopefully we can keep that simple. The only 50 or 55 inch for these two TVs would be the X90J. The X95J only comes in 65, 75, and 85 inch. And this year, the X90J doesn't offer that 85 inch. So if you're looking for a small TV, it's got to be the X90J. And if you want a massive 85 inch, then the X95J will be your choice. And at the time of this video, the 65 inch X90J is $14.99 in the US, while the X95J is still at its full price at $19.99. So that's a $500 or 33% price jump if you're going with the X95J over the X90J. So let's hit all the benefits of that jump. Again, remember that the X95J has the feet that can be raised or lowered, so you have two different looks. The TV has a better anti-reflective coating, so it can handle a bright room much better and can be viewed from a wider seating arrangement. So if you have a lot of ambient light, those are two solid benefits. On top of that, the X95J is significantly brighter than the X90J. And when you flip it around and talk about X95J in a dark room, it has twice as many dimming zones as the X90J, but lacks a bit of contrast, and the screen on the X95J wasn't perfectly uniform with regard to its black level. With all that said, I still would prefer the X95J for a dark room because of the 60 dimming zones. I felt like the blooming or light bleeding wasn't quite as noticeable in the X95J. So there seems to be a pretty solid advantage with both models offering the same number of HDMI 2.1 ports for gaming 4K at 120 frames per second, and that there just doesn't seem to be an advantage to the X90J besides the price. But let's not completely write off the X90J. A lot of people bought the X900H last year, and I felt like I saw a lot of 85-inch X900H, but maybe that was because they discounted them so heavily after not selling, and that is probably why the X90J isn't available in 85-inch this year. But overall, it's still a pretty solid TV. The simple stand is just fine, and the build quality of the TV is also something that most people don't care about as long as the TV works. The X90J still has the XR processor, which offers the really sharp picture as well as silent ambient light detection and great highlights. And to be fair, most people who are in a moderately lit or darker room would have little issue with the reflectivity of the screen on the X90J, while the better contrast keeps the picture looking solid even from wide angles. So really the X90J is more than sufficient for cable watching and HDR movies or for gaming for most people. And actually you get 10 movies with the BRAVIA core if you buy the X90J versus the X95J. So that's a nail in the coffin, right? I'm kidding. But for me, final answer, the The X95J would be worth the price increase because the only instance that I would get either one of these TVs would be if I was in a really bright room and needed the extra juice to overcome the ambient light. Because if I was considering one of these TVs in a normal or dark room, then I would just tell me to get an OLED instead. The Sony A80J is only $300 more than the X95J at the 65-inch, and the quality difference of the A80J over the X95J and X90J is actually hard to pass up. So for most people, the choices are going to be to save a significant amount of money by getting something like the X90J at $1499, or maybe splurging and get the A80J and having one of the best TVs in the world if you're in a medium or darker room. Sounds like you may need to check out my video on the A80J and see what that's all about. But what do you think? Are you going to buy the X90J, X95J, or one of these OLEDs? Or maybe are you just more confused now than ever? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure to smash the like button, make sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell, and just like that, you can be the installer.